Mercedes may not be in trouble because McLaren found one miracle upgrade. They may be in trouble because the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile has finally forced the truth to the surface. In Barcelona, Lando Norris went fastest in free practice 1 by just 9 milliseconds, Oscar Piastri was right behind, and suddenly the team that looked lost at the start of the season looked dangerous again. But here is the part Mercedes should fear. McLaren used Mercedes power, yet their speed exploded right after the biggest Mercedes gray areas were targeted: the hot compression test, the banned hybrid shutdown trick, and the growing fight over active aerodynamics. So the real question is not just how McLaren got faster. The real question is whether Mercedes were ever as far ahead as they looked, or if Barcelona is the first race where their advantage finally starts to disappear. Subscribe to the channel. Barcelona is the circuit where a false recovery gets exposed almost immediately. A team can look better for one session somewhere else. A driver can set one sharp lap on a track that hides the car's weaknesses. A low fuel run can make a struggling package look healthier than it really is. But Barcelona is different. It asks for everything. Aero balance through long corners. Straight line efficiency. Traction. Tire control. Hybrid deployment. Confidence under braking. And if one part of the car is not working, the lap usually reveals it. That is why McLaren's speed in Spain cannot be dismissed as noise. Lando Norris going fastest in free practice 1 by 9 milliseconds might sound tiny. In normal life, 9 milliseconds is almost nothing. But in Formula 1, after months of Mercedes domination, that gap is enough to make the entire paddock look twice. Especially when Oscar Piastri is also right there, close enough to prove this was not just one perfect lap from one driver. That is what makes the story dangerous for Mercedes. Because one fast McLaren can be explained away. Two fast McLarens suggest the car has found something. And the timing could not be worse for the team that has controlled the season. Mercedes entered this new era looking almost untouchable. Their car won everything through Monaco. Their power unit became the center of the biggest technical arguments of the season. Kimi Antonelli built a massive championship lead. George Russell kept Mercedes at the front of the Constructors' Championship. For a while, it looked as if the rest of the grid were not fighting Mercedes on track, but fighting the rulebook Mercedes had understood better than everyone else. Then the rulebook started fighting back. The first major shift was the compression ratio controversy. That is the engine question that followed Mercedes from preseason testing all the way into the heart of the championship. In simple terms, compression ratio is how tightly the engine squeezes air and fuel before ignition. The tighter the squeeze, the more efficient and powerful the engine can become. The regulation limited that squeeze to 16:1. But the original measurement was taken in cold, static conditions. That detail changed everything. Because an engine does not race cold. It races hot, stressed, and alive. Materials expand. Tolerances change. Behavior shifts. And rivals believed Mercedes had found a way to pass the cold test while benefiting from a higher effective compression ratio once the engine reached real operating temperature. That is the kind of advantage that can make a car look dominant without giving rivals something obvious to copy. It is not a new front wing everyone can photograph. It is not a setup choice someone can guess. It is buried in the engine's material behavior, in how the power unit responds to heat, in the gap between inspection conditions and racing conditions. And that is why the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile had to step in. From the 1st of June, the compression ratio had to comply at 130 degrees Celsius as well as in ambient conditions. That meant the engine could no longer only prove itself when cold. It had to survive a test closer to the reality of racing. That matters because Barcelona came immediately after this new pressure began to matter. Mercedes still won Monaco after the change, and that proved their car was not simply a one-trick machine. But Monaco is not Barcelona. Monaco is narrow, slow, and strange. It rewards track position, confidence, and precision more than complete aerodynamic efficiency. Barcelona is wider, faster, more demanding, and much more revealing. So when McLaren showed pace in Spain, the question became unavoidable. Did McLaren suddenly make a huge leap, or did Mercedes lose part of the cushion that had made everyone else look slow? That is the question Mercedes do not want becoming the story. Because McLaren are not just any rival. They use Mercedes power. That makes their speed politically uncomfortable. If Ferrari get closer, Mercedes can say Ferrari have improved. If Red Bull get closer, Mercedes can say Red Bull found their own solution. But if McLaren get closer with the same power unit family, the explanation becomes more delicate. It forces people to ask what the works Mercedes team had that McLaren did not. Was it a better chassis? Better cooling? Better energy deployment? Better integration? A stronger understanding of the gray areas? Or was the early gap inflated by Mercedes using performance windows that customer teams could not fully access or exploit? Those questions are poisonous inside a partnership. On paper, Mercedes and McLaren are connected. In reality, they are fighting for the same prizes. McLaren do not want to be the customer team that makes the works team look good. They want to beat the works team. And Mercedes do not want to supply power to a rival that suddenly starts revealing that the engine itself was never the whole difference. That is why Barcelona changes the tone. Earlier in the season, McLaren's struggles made Mercedes look even stronger. If the customer team with the same power unit was far behind, Mercedes could argue their dominance came from total car excellence. The factory package was simply better. Better aero, better integration, better operations, better drivers, better understanding. But if McLaren suddenly appear fast once the most controversial Mercedes advantages are being restricted, the story flips. Now the gap looks suspicious. Now the timing looks meaningful. Now Mercedes have to defend not only their speed, but the source of their speed. And that is where the second major technical controversy becomes impossible to ignore. The motor generator unit kinetic shutdown trick. This was a separate issue from the compression ratio debate, but it fits the same pattern. The 2026 rules required electrical deployment to ramp down near the end of a flying lap. The idea was to stop teams from blasting full electrical power right to the timing line in qualifying. But Mercedes and Red Bull engineers reportedly found a way around that by using an emergency shutdown function. The system was meant for real technical problems. But if triggered at the end of a qualifying lap, it could let the car keep maximum electrical deployment for longer before shutting down after the lap was already complete. That is clever. It is also risky. Once the system shut down, the car could be left without electrical power for up to a minute, making it much slower than surrounding cars. Ferrari raised safety concerns. The governing body investigated. A technical directive later banned the practice as a strategic qualifying tool and allowed it only in genuine emergencies. Antonelli himself admitted it was not so safe. That is another Mercedes advantage reduced. Again, Mercedes were not the only team involved. Red Bull power units were tied to the same kind of trick. But Mercedes were the team dominating the championship, so every lost gray area matters more for them. The fastest team has the most to defend. The team in control has the most to lose when the governing body starts clarifying what is allowed. And that is why McLaren's Barcelona pace feels like a warning. It comes after the qualifying trick was banned. It comes after hot condition engine testing began. It comes after months of questions about whether Mercedes had gained too much from regulatory wording. And it comes from a team that had looked lost, unreliable, and behind. That combination creates tension. McLaren's early 2026 problems were serious. The car did not work as expected in Barcelona testing. Piastri acknowledged that some elements had disappointed the team. Hybrid system failures damaged their early season. The gap to Mercedes looked enormous. But a struggling team in a new regulation era can improve quickly if it identifies the right problem. Maybe McLaren needed time to understand the Mercedes power unit inside their own car. Maybe they needed to fix electrical reliability before chasing performance. Maybe their aerodynamic platform needed a cleaner balance around the new energy deployment demands. Maybe the car had potential, but the systems were not working together. Barcelona may be the first sign that those pieces are finally connecting. That should worry Mercedes more than a one-lap headline. Because McLaren's threat is not only pace, it is direction. If the MCL40 has found a working window at Barcelona, that means the team can develop from it. Engineers can trust the data. Drivers can push with confidence. Strategy becomes more aggressive. The entire program begins to breathe. And when a team like McLaren finds direction, it rarely stays quiet for long. This is why the word trick becomes so dangerous. People hear trick and imagine one secret device, one illegal part, one hidden button. But the real trick behind McLaren's Spanish Grand Prix speed may be much more subtle. It may be that McLaren's car is finally working at the same time Mercedes' advantages are being narrowed. That is not one thing. It is a swing. Mercedes lose a little. McLaren gain a little. Suddenly the timing screen changes. And in Formula One, once the timing screen changes, the entire political mood changes with it. Now McLaren can push harder. Ferrari can ask more questions. Red Bull can join the pressure. The governing body faces more attention. Mercedes have to explain every small drop in performance as something normal, not evidence that the rule changes mattered. That is a difficult position. Because if Mercedes stay fast, rivals will keep questioning how. If Mercedes lose pace, rivals will say the gray areas were the reason. If McLaren keep improving, the customer relationship becomes tense. If McLaren fall back, Mercedes can breathe again, but only until the next circuit asks the same question. Barcelona is only the beginning of that pressure. The most uncomfortable part for Mercedes is that McLaren are not politically passive. They have already reportedly challenged Mercedes' active aerodynamic integration, flagging concerns that could cost Mercedes straight-line efficiency if enforced. That means McLaren are not just trying to close the gap by improving their own car. They are trying to make the Mercedes advantage smaller. That is a completely different kind of rivalry. A customer team that only improves is dangerous. A customer team that improves while attacking your interpretation of the rules is a threat. And that is why Mercedes are in big trouble. Not because they have suddenly become weak. They have not. Not because McLaren have already won the Spanish Grand Prix. The weekend has not delivered that final answer yet. The trouble is that the story has changed. Mercedes are no longer controlling every part of the narrative. McLaren have inserted doubt. And doubt is powerful. Doubt makes every Mercedes advantage look suspicious. Doubt makes every McLaren improvement look like evidence. Doubt makes every rule clarification feel like a turning point. Doubt makes the championship leader look less invincible, even before the points table changes. That is what Barcelona has done. It has taken a season that looked like Mercedes' domination and opened the first serious question. What happens when the gray areas close, the customer team catches up, and the track finally asks the car to prove everything? The next layer is where McLaren's speed becomes more than a timing screen surprise. Because Barcelona does not only ask whether a car is fast, it asks why it is fast. And when McLaren suddenly appear near the top after weeks of struggling with the new era, the answer cannot be reduced to confidence, track evolution, or one aggressive practice run. There is a deeper mechanical story underneath. McLaren had been fighting the same problem many teams face when regulations change completely. The parts may be legal. The wind tunnel numbers may look promising. The simulator may suggest a direction. But once the car reaches the track, the systems do not always speak the same language. The engine demands one thing. The cooling demands another. The aero platform wants stability. The tires want kindness. The electrical system wants clean deployment and recovery. If one of those systems falls out of rhythm, the whole car suffers. That is what seemed to happen to McLaren early in the season. They had Mercedes power, but not Mercedes performance. They had a strong team, but not a car that looked settled. They had drivers capable of fighting at the front, but the MCL40 looked fragile in the new technical world. Piastri's early hybrid failures were not just unlucky moments. They were symptoms of a car still trying to understand its own nervous system. And in 2026, the nervous system matters more than ever. The old Formula One problem was already hard enough. Build downforce, reduce drag, protect tires, manage fuel, find balance. But the new regulations added another layer. Electrical power became a much larger part of the total performance. The car's energy deployment had to be managed with far more precision. A team could no longer think of the combustion engine, battery, motor, and aero package as separate tools. They became one connected system. That is why McLaren's recovery, if real, is so dangerous. Because it suggests the team may have stopped fighting the car and started connecting it. A car that is disconnected feels random. One lap the rear overheats. The next lap the energy delivery does not arrive where the driver expects it. One corner feels alive, the next feels dead. The driver asks for changes, but the engineers cannot tell whether the problem is aero, suspension, electrical deployment, or tire temperature. That kind of confusion destroys weekends. But when the car starts connecting, everything changes. The driver feels the power arrive in a more predictable way. The tires stop being punished by sudden slides. The aero platform remains calmer through the long corners. The team can choose a setup and trust it for more than one lap. Suddenly the lap time is not coming from one heroic moment. It is coming from fewer mistakes, fewer compromises, fewer hidden losses. That may be what Barcelona is revealing about McLaren. And it matters because Mercedes have been winning through exactly that kind of integration. Mercedes did not dominate the opening part of the season only because they had a strong engine. They dominated because their whole package worked around the new rules better than anyone else. The power unit, chassis, active aerodynamic philosophy, and driver execution all seemed to support each other. That is why the car could survive controversy and still keep winning. But if McLaren have now found a similar connection, the Mercedes advantage becomes less secure. This is especially uncomfortable because McLaren are not an outside manufacturer with a completely different power source. They are connected to Mercedes through the power unit. They are close enough to understand the shape of the problem, but independent enough to attack the factory team if the relationship becomes competitive.